Aim high, shoot far, aim for the moon. If you miss, you'll hit a star. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Better Together. I am your host, Chanel, and we are here with Better Together, sharing our lupus stories. For this evening, this is going to be a dynamic show. We got some great people in the virtual building right now. We have a panel of lupus patient advocates who have just been doing some amazing work around advocacy, but are speaking to this topic. And we also have medical professionals who are here to help us move forward on a rather frustrating issue for the lupus community. So we know one of the things that disrupts our lives, if it disrupts our lives, it impacts the entire community. And so we are going to talk about this elephant in the room, clinical trials. And our goal is to really find out how lupus clinical trials can better serve us as people of color, us as women, us as living with lupus. So tonight we're on a journey for solutions, okay? We're gonna get busy with the facts, answers to our apprehensions about clinical trial process. So we're gonna talk about the benefits, the risks of clinical trials, and keep it real, because we keep it real here, about the history of medical abuse, the neglect that we've seen serve to underserved communities, and also what patient-centered engagement when we reach out for help needs to look like, okay? So we're gonna bring in the facts, and as always, speak to all the ways we can advocate, because we're gonna advocate for better options for ourselves in this role. So our Better Together medical host, double board certified rheumatologist, advocate for us, welcome to the virtual stage, Dr. Michaela Bayard. She is here to help us navigate our lupus journey for solutions. And you're going to help us talk a little bit about the pros and cons, or what the nuances of clinical trials. So I got to get to the point. How do we know if a clinical trial is part of the solution or maybe part of the problem?
Well, before I get started, Chanel, thank you again. I'm always excited to delve into these topics with you and our viewers, and of course, our expert guests. So, in my opinion, when you talk about solutions in lupus care, clinical trials, or in a much broader sense, research really can play a big part and should be a part of the solution. As a physician, I want to give the patients I see the best treatments. And so if a clinical trial can really help me offer the best options safely, and that's a really important word, it is a part of the solution. The really difficult part, and when we have some amazing guests who are working in this area, is that we need to have clinical trials that tell us more about each person and if everyone can benefit from that safe treatment. We need to know if it's inclusive of someone that looks like you, Chanel, looks like me, and if it works for someone with similar medical histories. So when I'm deciding if I want to give someone a medication and thinking about these research studies, more than safety, we need to know more about who someone identifies as, their medical history, the genetics. And the great thing is that now well-designed clinical trials are really doing all of this, and this is our standard. The sad part, as you mentioned, is that has not always been the history. And I'll be real, when I see patients and talk to them about being a part of research, we still have that history heavy on our minds of what wasn't done right and the mistrust that really happened in communities that we both relate to. So when we think about this, and we're going to actually have a video where we talk a little bit more about how people think about research, people really have to understand and see what's being done now and today, because we acknowledge that there is this heavy history, but we're doing a lot to change how we engage with communities and do research. So I'm actually going to introduce a little video where we have guests that we've seen before, Tiffany Marie, the founder of Lupus Chat, and Kim House, who's a personal trainer and founder of the House Foundation, who are going to tell you a little bit more about their own thoughts on this topic.
The most important positive about clinical trials is the fact that when they're successful, they provide new treatment options for people.
Most of us understand anxiety, especially if you have lupus, and just all the things that go through your head about what if, it goes wrong? What if, who knows? What if I grow a tail? Like, there's so many uncertainties that you don't know about when you're doing a clinical trial because it's a trial.
Sometimes they're the only way that people can access healthcare and treatment. Some people have exhausted all their other options, and the clinical trial is one way for them to sort of receive the care that they're unable to get otherwise.
I was super excited to try it simply because it was made specifically for people with lupus. But when I found out that there were not a lot of Black women that have participated in the trial, it really made me nervous. So, it's kind of a double-edged sword because we need more Black women to participate in this particular trial, but most of us are nervous or scared to try it out.
Those who came before us experienced horrific experiments on their personhood. And that dark history is something that runs deep in this country, and it's not easily something that is forgotten.
If you're introduced to a clinical trial by a community of doctors or, by a team, and they're just like, hey, here's this new drug, 4562-1A, we want you to try it out. We don't know what will happen. It could be even a placebo. It could work out well. It could work out terrible. We don't know, but we want to try it out on you. It's going to be hard for you to say yes to something like that, no matter how much money they're offering, if you don't feel like you have a good support of people in the medical community that you can come to if you have questions. So having doctors participate like in support groups and really just bridge the gap between the lupus community and the medical community by coming into the communities, by participating in events, by speaking on lives and sharing about these clinical trials and why, it's something that you're encouraging and think would be good for others to try.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. That was such a great cue-in, Dr. Michaela. But that video, I have a lot of the same concerns and have had those same issues around clinical trials, thinking about the Tuskegee experiments, thinking about the trials that happened in Guatemala, all of these different situations where people have trusted the medicine, trusted the doctors, and were not transparent around those things. And, that was part of why I initially was hesitant to try a clinical trial. My doctor, well, at least my previous doctor, she was based in a medical hospital, a university hospital, so they're doing a lot of trials and tests and different studies and things of that nature. But it was, it's very challenging. So imagine, you are somebody that isn't, necessarily looking or Google it. You're not a Googler to know all of the details about what a clinical trial is. And post-COVID, we know that there was so much misinformation that was given around this process.
Right.
But I know for me, it seemed like it was the only option. And I think that that's something that happened to quite a few of the guests that we have here that we're going to get to in a few.
Quick question, Chanel, though, for you, what was that difference? You mentioned it was the only option, but there must have been some interface or interaction with someone that really, enlightened you about it.
Well, I think for me, it was a lot of me trying to figure it out. I think that, one of the struggles that happens is sometimes doctors, really assume like, I'm the doctor and I tell you to do this, that you're just going to do it. Mm-hmm. And they don't think that they need to arm you with information or give you all of the background.
Right.
It's just like, this is your choice, and I think that sometimes that's a challenge. Now I won't say I'm a Googler because I try to stay off of like, some of the sites like the MD sites that tell you you're diagnosed, you have a cold and it's like, oh my gosh, you have cancer, like those kind of sites that sometimes can go off. But I did my own research and I really, really tried to look up like, what is a clinical trial and what does the process even look like? Mm-hmm. And I think we have so much more access to information around that. When I did the trial, I don't remember there being nearly enough conversation around it. Mm-hmm. Which is why I'm glad we're having this conversation here.
Yeah. And our next guest is going to tell us even more.
Yes, because our next guest is actually a part of the Lupus and Clinical Investigators Network, which is managed by the Lupus Research Alliance. Dr. Ashira Blazer, her role is to educate patients of color about clinical trials, to help them understand why their participation is really so important. And Dr. Blazer is also the assistant professor of medicine, the division of rheumatology at the Hospital for Special Surgery. We got family over there at the HSS. Dr. Blazer, please welcome to the stage. Welcome to our virtual stage. So glad to have you as a guest here.
Hi, so glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have to ask, what's your lupus story and why did you choose to become a warrior for clinical trials?
Right. So I think of myself more as a warrior for research. So, I am a researcher. I look at lupus and African ancestry populations, and I do some genetics genomics research, but also I realize a lot of the reasons why people of color and women of color with lupus don't get the best care are due to structural factors, structural racism, and also lack of participation in science. And that's across the board, whether it's on the lab side of things or the clinical trial side of things. And so, my family members have lupus, so I'm very interested in lupus in Black women for that reason. And I just wanted to be able to advocate across the gambit.
Thank you. No, I mean, and it's important to have representation matters. And, and that's something I've said in other spaces where I've been kind of asked to speak to the lupus patient perspective. I've always said, so who are the people administering this trial, or who are the people that are here? If they don't look like me, then it does feel very, I don't necessarily want to be there. I don't feel comfortable. So seeing a familiar face, a familiar tone, a familiar cultural understanding definitely helps. But I think one of the first question I have to ask you is, can you please explain the clinical trial process?
Absolutely, yes. So for clinical trials, the point of a clinical trial is to take a scientific discovery and make it into some sort of medicine or intervention that we can use to improve outcomes. So there are multiple phases of clinical trials. So the first phase, which includes the fewest number of patients, says, is this medication safe, right? So is this something that I can safely give to individuals and not cause them to be sick? And what are the side effects?
Is that to people, or are those like to mice?
So that's a fair point. So there are pre-clinical studies, right? So before anything ever comes to people, we study it in the lab, we study it in animals. And so we get a good idea as to how a medication works, but we have to be able to study it in people to be able to bring it to the larger population. So before that happens, preclinical, but when we talk about the clinical portion of clinical trials, there's the phase 1, right? Is this medication safe? The next phase is this medication effective, and how much should we be giving to patients, right? So this includes more people, usually on the order of hundreds of people, and we determine how this medication should be given. Is it effective? What's the great dose range? The next phase is the phase 3. So this is when we have thousands of participants. And so we say, compared to people who are getting the standard of care for that disease process, do people who get the medication do better? And so this is your head-to-head placebo control portion of the trial. And so you're going to be most likely to be asked to participate in that part of the trial.
Got it.
So, Ashira, when you talk about these different phases, because you and I know that they're each kind of their own studies, could you tell people about that? Because I think people sometimes think they're signing up for all of these different phases.
Right. So each of those phases recruit separately, right? So often patients say, I'm going to be a guinea pig, or, is somebody experimenting on me? Do we even know if this is safe? And for the most part, when you're recruited to these trials, you already have some safety information. So it's important for you to ask, what phase of the trial is this recruitment for?
That's a good point. And thank you. That's a great question. I think a lot of times, everybody always, it's unknown. So we're all look at it like, are we the beginning? And not knowing what those phases are definitely makes it really challenging. So, I mean, what do you think that, what are the things that a doctor needs to consider when giving? What should my doctor consider when trying to position me for a clinical trial? Like, what should I be asking? What do you think doctors need to do better around that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that doctors need to do is ask. So, we hear all the time that people of certain ethnic backgrounds are less likely to sign up for clinical trials. And it turns out that doctors are less likely to ask those people whether or not they want to be involved in clinical trials. And so making sure that each person is being informed, regardless of their background, is the first thing. The next is to understand the risks associated with that clinical trial, because those are not the same for everybody, right? So, if I have a job that allows me to take time off, I don't risk getting fired. It is really close for me to pop over and do this trial appointment, and I can understand the risks and the benefits. And by the way, if I have a side effect, I have health insurance, my risk is a lot less than if I don't have those things, right? And communities of color are very marginalized. And so understanding what it would take for that person to participate in the trial, what risks are they facing? Are there any sorts of resources to help mitigate that risk is really important. And having a candid conversation with the patient about that is very, very important.
I agree so much. And I know you do a lot of work in this arena, Dr. Blazer. And I'd love for you to speak on this, because I think people don't know that we're really actually working to fix that. We want people to be in trials and not have to put their lives on hold. So what's being done in research about that?
Yeah, so there are a number of different companies and also different foundations that are very interested in this. How do we balance the risks and the benefits of research across populations? And I know the Lupus Research Alliance has had multiple of these summits to think about this. And so, I think the understanding that this is not the same for all populations is coming about. And there are a fair number of resources that are involved in clinical trials that you can ask about. And this is sort of new. So, transportation benefit, making sure that you're getting seen at times where you need to be seen, those kinds of things. So, it's pretty exciting, because I think that that's going to be important in engaging people, and then also engaging new providers. So many people of color see providers out in the community and not at HSS or academic medical centers. So bringing new doctors into the fold that are in these minority serving communities is a big part of it too.
I mean, go ahead, Chanel.
We had a moment. I was going to say, actually, so as a patient, what happens if it's not working for me? Like, what happens if I get worse? While I'm on it?
Yeah. So this is the other thing people need to understand. You can withdraw from a clinical trial at any point. This is completely voluntary, right? And I think one thing, patients will get involved in clinical trials and they'll think, I'm definitely going to get the medication, but maybe not. You may be getting the placebo, right? So there's a possibility that you either don't get better or you get worse. And that's why there's such close monitoring. So if at any point you feel like you're getting worse, or your doctor thinks that you're getting worse, you will be withdrawn from that trial.
Oh, so I think that's the other missing component, that part about I'm still working with my doctor.
Yes.
There you go.
Yes. And actually, one of the things that I appreciate about clinical trials is, many people who don't have access to care or can't work closely with their doctor or need a little nudge for someone to be calling them and following up with them, get that extra support when they're a part of a clinical trial. So, that's not explicitly said as a benefit of a clinical trial, but I do find that it's a little bit easier for my patients to follow along with their care plan when they're involved.
Yeah. I think, I might remember the statistic wrong, but at one point, Black Americans, or people identify as Black in the US, were as low as 5% making up clinical trials. Like, are those numbers the same? And what do you think about that, Dr. Blazer?
They've not gotten better. Yeah. And I mean, it's really, I have to say that I have some conflict around this, right? Because on the one hand, we need people to participate to understand how medications work in all people, right? And even just the diversity in general. There's biologic and genetic diversity within racial populations, and African ancestry people actually have the most diverse genomes, right?
Mhm.
And so we stand to learn quite a bit about medications when everyone participates, but people who do not have access to care do not have access to clinical trials.
Right.
And so the same factors that prevent us from seeing a rheumatologist regularly, from getting our medications regularly, from staying off extra steroids when we could be taking a medication that has fewer side effects, right? Those same factors keep us away from clinical trials. And so, I think a lot of the strategy has to be, how do we increase access to care for everyone so that everyone has the same access to clinical trials?
Yeah, and I know you and I, do this work, and we've talked a lot about this. And I think that there are a lot of ways we're trying to work on increasing engagement, but also increasing people's understanding about clinical trials. Do you have any other thoughts on what's being done and what other forums we're working on this?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are lots of great researchers who are thinking about this. Um, Dr. Sarah Shake is one of them, and she's been doing a number of studies thinking about different ways to consent patients. Because the other thing is, our consent processes are these big legalese forms, right? Most people who are going through them can't really understand them. No one's really explaining. And, the first part, we talk about mistrust on the part of the patients, but the first step to being trusted is to be trustworthy, right? So I think a lot of times when we have this language that is just all smoke and mirrors, our patients aren't going to trust that, especially when they know that there's this historic misuse of these populations, and honestly, current misuse. I mean,
Of course.
patients are neglected in the healthcare system all of the time, right? And so I think we have to be very, very intentional about the ways that we talk to patients about clinical trials, and know that we're going to have to spend more time with certain people because we have more to explain to certain people, right?
Right.
That's such a great point. The whole, like, you have more to explain. Like, you can't be mad that people are not trusting you if you historically, if somebody does something wrong to me, I'm definitely gonna remember, historically. And to expect people to just let go of all of that immediately. And I do a lot of work around just speaking about clinical trials, because I've been a part of them, and I'm still on a medication that I was on a clinical trial for that wasn't at market. So when I think about it, for me, I think that it's really important for us to also understand that, to have these places and spaces to be able to engage with each other. And I think I spend quite a bit of time working with organizations around, how do you make a space feel welcoming to a population of people that were not welcomed in a lot of these spaces? Like, what does that look like? So everything from diversity of the clinical trial staff. How do you create documents that speak to the needs and the fears that people have, and I think that those are the things, like trying to pretend it doesn't exist doesn't help. And not being detailed about all that goes into this, and this whole process that you just explained in 15-20 minutes. When our doctors only see us sometimes for 10 minutes, they're trying to blaze through to get to the next patient. So, with all of those things that you talked about, just access to care, those are things that I'm very, very passionate about. And it's so great to see somebody else on the front line, fighting for those things for us.
Absolutely.
So say I'm a patient, because we have Chanel, who's had the experience, and then Dr. Blazer, who's really running these. How do I advocate for myself when I'm sitting, listening to someone consent me for a big trial? And what do I say and ask?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is, what phase of this trial, right? And even, can I have more time, right? I think a lot of people think, if someone's consenting them, they have to sign up right then. And that's not true, right? Where can I find information on what was found in phase 1 and phase 2? What are the side effects, right? And what's going to happen if I develop a side effect? Who can I report to, right? All of those things. And then also, what are my rights as a patient? So I think a really big topic right now is how's data being used? A lot of these trials create quite a large amount of data, and blood samples may be stored, DNA may be stored, right? Who has access to that data? When can that data be shared? And are there tiers where I can say, I would like to consent to this, but not that, right? You're okay to have my clinical data, but my genetic data is mine, right? That is all very important because, when we think about how research is propagated, it's important to make sure that we can make as many discoveries as possible, but your privacy is also extremely important.
Yeah, that's good to know that you have some power to say this is, part of what I want and what I don't, because I don't think people know that.
Yeah, you don't have to sign up for all the things.
I didn't know that. I might have signed up for all the things when I did it.
I mean, you can if you want to, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. This is completely voluntary.
So in the best case scenario where you may be in a later phase and receiving a treatment that is really helping, what does that look like and mean after the study ends?
Right. So that is one big place where I am interested in advocating. So when we say balancing the burdens and the benefits of clinical trials, we mean how hard is it for me to participate in this trial? And after the trial, how likely am I to get access to a medication that works, right? So for all clinical trials, only about 25% yield a medication that will be marketed, right? However, we know that certain populations don't have as great access to care and also are likely to have lapses in insurance, right? Are likely to be unable to afford very expensive medications. And so many trials have a plan for being able to provide medication to people who participated in trials. That's something to ask about. Also, many companies have programs that increase your ability to get medication often free. And so that's a great thing to talk about when you're thinking about being a part of a clinical trial, because if this works for me, what happens when the trial is over, right? You still need to be able to access, and we have to honor the fact that many populations aren't going to be able to.
But what I am hearing is that I might not have healthcare coverage and I'm a part of a trial and then get some sort of coverage for medication, which is a huge benefit.
Oh, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. But lupus is forever and trials are not.
I mean, so it sounds like we're pretty much recognizing how much power a patient has as part of this. I think that that's the thing. A lot of times we feel like we're powerless, like you're putting us in this unknown space and I'm just at your whim. My blood is yours to take for forever and ever, but the idea that we can actually advocate for ourselves, we can tell our doctor, I need more time to think about this, decide whether we really want to participate. And also, it might be a little challenging, and I thank you so much for working on this process, but comb through that paperwork and see what those options are as well. That's really, really important to know as a person living with a chronic illness that I'm trying to manage. And also, thank you. Let us know to ask for all the things. Like I want, give me a Metro card, living in New York City, like
Metro card. What's this Uber situation like? Also, having lupus means you may have brain fog sometimes. You're very busy with all the things that are going on, right? The other thing is often if you are seeing a physician who is doing clinical trials, they have a social work department, right? They have people who are there to help you understand. So research coordinators are wonderful. Many of them are well informed, but there may also be other resources. So, do your research until you feel satisfied. And if you need help, ask for help. Like you definitely have power in this process.
So ask and you shall receive, right? At least, well, we here at Better Together, we're always talking about like this idea of advocacy and advocating for yourself. So this seems like another area that we really need to make sure we advocate for ourselves, and that there are so many options out there, depending on the trial, that could really make the trial worthwhile. That rhymed. See that? Look at that. Like I was a poet or something. I might have a poem at the end of this for you all. Well, but thank you so much, Dr. Blazer. So much information. Stick with us. We're gonna bring in our two other guests, who are super amazing lupus warriors, and both of them, after years of health setbacks, searched for solutions by participating in clinical trials. So they're here to share their successes and maybe some not so successful moments in that process. We have Camilla Gilliard, a longtime lupus warrior, and also she has been a part of so many different organizations you've talked about, like the Lupus Research Alliance, and has done so much work and advocacy. And we also have Raquel Dozier, who's the founder of At Lupus in Color, which you should definitely follow on Instagram. They already got a lot of followers, but she does really great work in educating and speaking about and connecting others living with lupus. But we're going to bring both of them to the stage. Camilla and Raquel, welcome.
Hi.
How are you doing? Both of you, I always say, we really make lupus look great. You know, you both look so lovely on here. Thank you for joining us. And so, yeah, no, we need you all to help us tell this story, because it's really important to have this conversation happen with folk that know what it's like. So first, we're going to start with Camilla. Like, you joined a clinical trial, and you told one of our producers that you joined it to help take back your power, take back the power of your body, right? What did you mean by that?
Well, I've always known from personal experience that feeling hopeless is a direct path to depression, anxiety, and it's a losing trail. So lupus is a beast all by itself. You don't need anything else added on to that. So going into a clinical trial, well, with lupus, you can't get into the ring with anxiety and depression and thinking that you're going to fail. You have to get into the ring for that fight with hope. And to me, that's what clinical trials meant. It meant that I had hope. There was something out there that was going to help me succeed and fight this beast. So I feel like it's imperative that we are on the front line in our own defense against this disease. So going into the clinical trial, I felt like it was helping me take back the power and letting the disease know that I may have it, but it will never have me. So that's what I meant.
Awesome. And I mean, I think, can I ask how many clinical trials you've been a part of? Is it just a couple, or is this an ongoing process for you? Are you like the OG veteran of clinical trials?
I think I'm an OG, but I haven't been in a trial in a while. I've done several studies. Well, it's been a while, but they were a handful, but it was worth it. At the end of the day, it was worth it.
And what was your experience like? Was it a lot of poking and prodding? I think that's, like I said, we're trying to dispel some of the myths and also get to some of the facts, right? Like, what was that process like?
I like the part that Dr. Blazer mentioned with asking for help with anything that you don't understand, and knowing that there are social workers and research coordinators that you can reach out to if there's anything that you don't understand or if there's anything that you need. I was lucky to be at a center where they had all of that. And you know me personally, so you know that I will ask questions until I'm purple in the face. Like, it doesn't matter. Answers. If I'm not sure, I'm going to keep asking. But everybody is not like that. I'm hoping that more people get like that so that more people of color can participate in the trials, because it really is sad that of that 5%. But when you do a study, it's not always poking and prodding. When you do a trial, it's not always poking, and there will be some poking because you're taking a medication. Sometimes by infusion, with the IV intravenously. Sometimes it's taking a pill. So one thing that I liked about it, though, was that you do get more quality of care. You do, with a disease like lupus, you need to be checked on. You need to be seen about on a regular basis. And normally when you have a doctor Well, first of all, when people go through diagnosis, they usually see between 4 and 7 doctors in an emergency room setting or something like that before they even reach a diagnosis. So you can understand people being jaded about being asked to participate in a clinical trial if their journey into lupus was less than stellar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So once you get there, trustworthiness on both parts, the doctor and the patient, you have to understand that it's a relationship that trust has to be on the front line. So you're not going to take medication, you're not going to stay in the trial, you're not going to do, and sometimes it may be what you need to do for your health, but you may decline to do certain things if you don't feel that the staff or the doctor is trustworthy. So that's pretty much the basis of it. I felt a huge level of trust with my doctor and her staff. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to stay in the trial. Unfortunately, one of the first trials that I was in, it failed. The drug failed for lack of efficacy. So I was one of those people that was like, well, what next? What do I do now? The trial is over. The medication is not there. Where do we go from here? But if you have a doctor that you trust, you continue on that journey together.
That's so beautiful that you talk about journeying with your doctor, Camila. And, how did you find that your doctor and the person you worked with for the clinical trial worked together? What was that like?
Well, I was one of the lucky ones because my doctor was leading the clinical trial, but that is not the case for a lot of people. And I've heard recently that, I don't know how true this is, maybe you as doctors can attest to this, but I heard that some doctors are weary to give their patients information about a clinical trial that is not at a center that they are at because they feel like their patient may be poached. I don't know how true that is, but like I said, I'm lucky that my doctor was the doctor who was the participant, who was doing the study. So I'm lucky in that case. I can't really speak to anything other than that, but I understand the iffiness. I understand if you feel like you're getting better treatment at the clinical trial center than you are with your own doctor, then there's a problem there and it needs to be discussed. Open your mouth. It needs to be discussed.
I
I
love
mean,
that
that's.
you're
I was just
talking
about to
about.
say that's some tea, that's some drama there. People stealing people's patients. Ooh, but no, but that's. I think that you said it. At the end of the day, it's no one could steal me from my doctor when I was with her. When my previous doctor, like no one could steal me from her. So it's kind of like any relationship I can imagine. Like if your boo is treating you good, he don't have to worry.
You don't have to worry. You don't have to worry.
And
And
it's
then
good
I
if
know
you
that
recognize
doctors,
that you need better care.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I know that doctors have said, it doesn't make sense. Like doctors don't need to worry about that because if the clinical trial center poaches their patients, then that doctor is not going to send any more patients for a clinical trial. So, it's something that needs to be worked out.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing, Camila. I wanted to pull in Raquel. We know that you're doing so much with your advocacy work, as Chanel has mentioned. So we have a big question for you. If you were going to create your own user guide for someone who's thinking about signing up for a trial, what would it say?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think the first thing it would say would be patient and be open because we know that people are afraid. They're already afraid that they have the issue going on with lupus. So you really have to be patient and give yourself some grace as you trudge very lightly to go into a clinical trial. I've been in several different trials, not just for medicine, but there are also trials for like meditation and things of that nature, and studies that do all that type of thing. Um, be open, and that's the main goal, is to just be open to different ways to treat your lupus. um, I know I've spoken with Dr. Plazer before about a holistic view of your treatment and how important it is to see every side of it. So the first thing would be to be patient, be open, and then just do it. Sometimes our fear, sometimes we talk ourselves out of things. But when you get to a point like I was, where my body was shutting down and you don't have a choice, you don't want to have to deal with it that way. You want to be able to be in your right frame of mind where you're not scrambling to really just get something in you that will take away the pain, or that will take away the inflammation, or that will give you a quality of life back. So I would just say be patient, be open, and just really, really work hard to advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to give your opinion. Don't be afraid to say, this is not working. I still feel bad. It's not working for me. No, I don't want that part because it's hurting me. I think that sometimes we're afraid to let that out, and to let our doctors know, and to let others know that we're in pain and it's not working. And then the last thing I would say is just make sure that you're in communication with your doctor, because you've been working with your own doctor for the longest time. Don't let this trial period take you from communicating with your doctor, who has been working with you, hopefully together with you, to get you to a point of, better quality of life.
And you had such a good point, Raquel, and I think we should highlight this, that being in a clinical trial does not necessarily mean you're taking a pill or a medication. It could be looking at other treatments, as you mentioned, like meditation or some sort of other intervention. So it's not always about a medication. That was a really good point.
Yeah, and it's important for us to try and look at everything that we can use to make ourselves feel better. It's about the medication to get you stabilized, but then how are you going to cope? So you need other avenues that you can use, that you can cope with lupus, and that if the medication stops working, you have other ways to deal with those issues.
And I just want to bring Dr. Blazer back in. I'm just curious. I know you do both the research and you also still see some patients, a few patients. I know you're doing all that other lab work, that important work too. But with your patients that have done clinical trials, what did that conversation look like? And what do you think was helpful in maybe having some people consider clinical trials?
Yeah, so I will say that often my patients who have been in clinical trials are the best informed patients. I don't know if it's just that people who are interested in information and discovery are more interested in clinical trials, or if it's that in the process of having a research coordinator reach out to them, they start to learn more about lupus in general and treatments in general. But I do find that my patients who are in clinical trials get extra hands-on care and get more information. And so that does, make me pretty appreciative. I also find that I tend to either have the study coordinator talk to my patients multiple times, or I talk to my patients multiple times before they enter into clinical trials. So, one of the things about being a researcher is, most of the funding that I get comes from my research. And so I have the luxury of time with my patients. So I'll spend like a whole hour or, sometimes more with my patients. And so I really delve into these topics very deeply. And I make sure that they're comfortable before they enter any kind of study. And so, I find that my patients who enter into clinical trials are usually the ones who are the most comfortable with trials and also the most comfortable with me. So.
Right.
And I also think, because I've collaborated with physician researchers like Dr. Blazer, when you as a rheumatologist are having patients participate in clinical trials, you as the rheumatologist are learning too, because it's a continual learning process for us. So you want a rheumatologist who knows about these trials and wants to involve their patients in these possibilities.
For sure.
Yeah, I've definitely been the geek that's gone to my doctor like, I Googled, look, this came out.
Right.
And so I think it's helpful to be a patient that has a good relationship with their rheumatologist, but also is a nerd. You're going to read everything and you're going to subscribe to all of the newsletters and things of that nature. So I think that's good. Can I ask, I did have one more question. Dr. Blazer, what makes somebody a good candidate for a clinical trial? Is it just that there are no other options? I feel like that's usually what we lead with when we talk about clinical trials.
No. So people who can participate in clinical trials are the best candidates for clinical trials. Most trials have some sort of inclusion criteria. So, different medications may be tested for different aspects of lupus. And so, you want someone who fills that criteria. But just a very well-informed person who's motivated to participate is going to be a great candidate. And, sometimes if certain physicians can think, oh, this person's not motivated or they can't do it. But also when we have extra support network and support systems for people who we would otherwise think wouldn't be good candidates, we can allow them to be good candidates and even improve their ability to access normal care.
All right. No, you're absolutely correct. And we're gonna actually go to our chat and our comment section and just bring some things to light. So one question came up. Why is there a disconnect between, how can the medical community better engage the Black community? Like, what are the things that you think would be helpful in that process? And that can be anybody. As a patient, I think we might know that answer too. So not just Dr. Blazer. Anyone
I don't know. I think it's such a broader spectrum as far as the biases that have always been in the medical community. And I think that we have to lead ourselves with information and be educated about that and try and learn how to finagle our way around those things so that we can get the information that we need. And it starts with education, educating yourself about your disease, and then educating yourself about different things that you can use to help your disease, but not to the point where you think you're dying of something else. You know what I mean? So
earlier, Chanel, I think, had mentioned about the Tuskegee experiments and things like that, things that we historically have happened that have pushed people of color away from clinical trials. I think that those things need to be acknowledged, talk about it for what it is. And then after that, you have to meet people where they are. You can't expect everyone to be at the level of a Dr. Blazer or a Dr. Baird, or even those of us who are patient advocates and have spent decades now learning about our disease and learning about medications and learning about the process of clinical trials and everything that goes along with it. Everyone is not at that level, not to put me up here and anyone down here, but you have to meet people where they are. So if that means going into the community colleges, going into the churches, going and signing up people, in emergency rooms where most of us are seen first and second and third time around, having someone there that can say, hey, let me talk to you about lupus. Dr. So-and-so told me that this might be the case. Have you heard about this? I have a pamphlet about that. That's just what you're going to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. And I just have to say, this word comes up so much, but people ask me, like, why are you making me a guinea pig? So, like, what would you say to that, Raquel, Camila, Dr. Blazer?
Somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
look, I'm gonna be completely honest. I don't feel like I think at first I felt like I was a guinea pig because that's my culture. That's what they tell you. You know what I'm saying? Oh, you can't be a guinea pig. You need to just chill out, go holistic, and don't do any medicine, all this nonsense. But when you start getting educated about your disease, all that goes out the window. Right. All of that goes out the window because now you're in a position where you have to learn, you have to get around what's going on in your life. And the reality is, some of us wouldn't be here if someone did not try a medication to be on the market. It's really that simple. It goes from diabetes to high blood pressure. Someone had to be the trial. Someone had to help us get where we are today. So why would you not want that for yourself or for someone else later on?
I never considered myself a guinea pig. I always thought that, like Raquel said, someone had to do it. And I feel that a part of empowering myself was doing something to help people other than myself. I remember in my early years, in my teen years, when I was first diagnosed in 1998, I didn't have anybody to look up to. I didn't have anybody to talk to about this. I didn't have anybody who knew anything about a clinical trial. There were no clinical trials that I even knew of. But now you're learning and you're seeing more. So why not participate? That's a part of taking your power back.
Mm-hmm. I also would say you're not actually a guinea pig. So when you enter a clinical trial, there's already safety information, there's already side effect information. You have rights, right? You can leave when you want to leave. No one is experimenting on you in a way that you can't control, right? So, I try to explain to patients, like, people think I get into this study and I'm just at the whim of some doctor or some scientist, and that's not true at all.
Right.
That's powerful. I mean, I feel like all of you are saying that you really need to self-advocate, you have power in this role, and that there's not this huge dynamic of someone just telling you what to do and you running with it. Right. So I think that's such an important note that we're going to... Emma, did you have anything else to add, Chanel?
No, I was just going to say, I really think that it's so important to have these spaces for us to have these conversations, in multiple ways. And I think sometimes people think that it's not sincere, that this is the machine is pushing these things upon us, when we realize that as living with the illness and dealing, these are the conversations I had with my family when I tried a clinical trial. And I think maybe we didn't even talk about that part of it. Like, what does it mean when you tell your family, yeah, I'm on this, drug, I'm trying this treatment out and seeing what happens, but when you're living with it and when it's in your body, it's important for us to always remember that we are at the end of the day in charge of that, and that these decisions are our own to make. And, thank you so much for bringing that into this space, everyone. Just this idea that, like, I am doing this for both myself and for others, and, and others like me. And it's really, really important.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. I think that we're all excited to think about how we advocate for providers that we trust to have these discussions, and how we think about moving forward past this history to improve how we interact with clinical trials. And so we just want to thank all of our guests tonight, and of course my co-host Chanel. We want you to remember to look for us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram. Please keep sharing and posting your comments. We're so excited to hear from all of you. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Biogen. We want to remind you, if you are interested in finding out more information on lupus, and especially clinical trials like we talked about tonight, please check out the interactive timeline in the link, participantRightsTimeline.com, as you can see below. So we're going to end tonight again with Chanel sharing some of her spoken word, and I'll ask her what she's sharing tonight.
This poem is called Power. When trust is historically broken, when what's unknown is exactly that, unknown, when you feel like you are making this decision alone, you are not. See, you are bringing the world with you. My warriors, we are holding all accountable. We are demanding our power, our choices, our options. We are healing ourselves and healing others in the process. We are fighting side by side. We are opening doors, advocating for more, asking for more, demanding more for ourselves, for our friends, for our mothers, our sisters, our brothers. We are advocating for more. This is us reclaiming our power. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a good night. See you next week.
Good night.